So, long before I started making TikToks, I'm an author, and I wanted to read you a piece that I had published in Filter magazine this week about what I tell my teens about my previous history of substance use disorder. So, the most chaotic period in my life was partially captured on film for a documentary about heroin addiction. This once felt like a unique burden, but is becoming more and more common for people without adequate housing and mental health care. In the 26 years since I stopped using drugs, I've been frequently asked, what will I tell my kids? I realized long ago that being in recovery didn't exempt me from stigma. I was determined to be as transparent as possible with my children and anyone who asked about society who treats people with drug associated with drug use. When my first child was born, I expected pain, tears, and a bit of embarrassment of having to repeatedly explain why my veins were hard to access. What I did experience instead was disdain, as if my past had made me an inept mother. My nurse had also seen in my chart that years earlier I contracted hepatitis C. Despite my chart saying that I had been cured, I was told that I shouldn't breastfeed, which isn't true. Because I'd given birth via emergency C-section, I was released with a prescription for opioids. Yet no one gave me any guidance around the discontinuation of those use, even though they knew about my history with heroin. So I was home alone with a screaming newborn, having withdrawal symptoms and afraid to tell anyone. As I sat holding my baby and crying, I wondered if CPS would be called if I asked for assistance. I called a friend instead. A community response was safer than an institutional response. Navigating full-time employment and raising 3 toddlers is what motivated me to begin to start sending people harm reduction supplies via mail, a practice which inspired the national program now called Next Distro. People who inject drugs particularly face so many barriers to staying safe. There's so much stigma involved in trying to get sterile syringes from a pharmacy on top of the travel time and expense. We needed to normalize access to harm reduction supplies so they could be delivered like anything else bought at a pharmacy. Assembling these packages of supplies became a family affair. One might be doing labels, another reminding me what items needed to go in the envelope. When we were younger, we just referred to these as medical supplies. As they grew, I gradually explained to them about how the supplies were used and why people weren't able to access them. I shared my own experiences, and it became a way to educate my children while developing empathy for people who were frequently just treated as disposable. I told them about my experiences living on the street, and I even took them to places where I used to sleep. Piece by piece, I explained my history, keeping it to their age level so they never felt lied to or dismissed. Instead of averting their eyes when people living on the street, averting their eyes when we saw people living on the street, my children learned to share their snacks. Now that they're teenagers, they're able to talk to their peers when an overdose affects someone they know. I am terrified by the possibility of my children experimenting with drugs themselves because of the risks of overdose. But by educating them only on abstinence, it does not give them the information they need to protect themselves or the people around them. From Just Say No to Red Ribbon Week to One Pill Can Kill, the abstinence-only mentality taught in schools is neither accurate nor effective. These campaigns explain nothing about how different drugs work or strategies for responding to overdose. I had to take a deep breath to steady myself when a recent school assembly had a speaker talking about fentanyl-laced cannabis. Children as young as 12 has contacted me to share that they revived a parent with naloxone that I had sent their household by mail. Kids need facts, not fear. They need to know about naloxone, rescue breathing, the difference between opioids and stimulants and cannabis. The list goes on. They need to know that these substances can be harmful to the developing brain, but they also need to know why. There's much more effective strategies than a blanket statement that all drugs are bad and all come with the same risks. What do I tell my children about my history with drugs? Anything they want to know. And so this was published this week in Filter Magazine.